So with competitive FPS games being as popular as ever, with the likes of Apex Legends, Valorant and Warzone still racking in massive player bases, a lot of people are looking into ways of improving their gaming setup, being that new settings, new monitor, new PC, but a lot of people ignore certain things that you should change every time you build a new computer, and those are the things I'm going to be focusing on the most, because to get better performance you not only need to have a powerful computer, you need to dial in the correct settings in order to maximize what you already have. So I'm going to show you what I do every single time I set up a new computer, and maybe you can learn a thing or two and implement them in your setup. First things first, if you're building a new setup, don't underestimate the importance of your sitting position. And here a lot of things are important, but as long as you can get in the same position with your arms and torso every single time, you can pretty much make any position work, like the variety of pro players that sit in a variety of different ways. If you want some pointers when it comes to finding your ideal position, you want to get a lot of space around your mouse hand. Ideally, you want to place at least your wrist on the mouse pad without having it tense up a lot. This not only helps you feel more comfortable during long playing sessions, but also it gives you a more stable point of contact with the table to help you dial in your aim every time. You also want to make sure that you can do at least a 180-degree turn without hitting anything with your mouse. So if you have to move your keyboard further away or even slightly rotate it, do so, but more on that a little later in the video. Then I always make sure I have good proper stock settings enabled in my BIOS, at least stock settings if I'm not doing any overclocking. And here it's very important to always remember to enable the XMP profile, particularly if you have an AMD Ryzen system, given how much performance you gain from enabling faster memory speeds. Simply go to your BIOS by holding the delete before Windows boots up. Yes, you can hold it, you don't need to spam it, and search for either DOCP or XMP settings, and when you find it, you should have one profile that will raise your memory clock to its default intended speeds. After you change it, make sure you save your settings and reboot. Some CPU and motherboard combos might not support certain memory speeds, so if your monitor goes black on reboot, just wait for it to power cycle a couple of times until you can come back to the BIOS and try setting the XMP profile again, but this time remember to lower the memory speed a little bit. But in most cases, this should be the easiest way you can get a performance boost in game, since a lot of motherboards just default to 2133 MHz, which is very slow for today's standard. And since we're changing default stock options, make sure that you do a little bit of research and find what's the best overdrive option for your particular monitor. But in general, you should probably avoid the fastest setting here, since in most monitors that can include high levels of artifacting, and usually one setting below the fastest works pretty well. But if you want to be absolutely sure, just search for a review on YouTube and you probably will find the answer there. Then let's talk about Windows, and whether you're running Windows 10 or Windows 11, here it's very common to have a lot of things running in the background that you don't really know, don't really care about, and they're just wasting resources without doing pretty much anything. This is particularly common if you have a pre-built computer. Here it's very common to have multiple antivirus softwares and just multiple control panels running for no good reason. So simply go to the task manager and to the startup tab and make sure you disable all those extras and then reboot your computer. Also, if you have just a lot of trash running permanently, just go to control panel and start uninstalling them one by one. Next, I always disable Xbox Game Bar and Game Capture, and if I want to capture some gameplay, I just use Nvidia Shadowplay instead for its better quality and lower impact on performance. Then I always install MSI Afterburner and HW Info to check how my temperatures are doing in game, and they're also great tools for monitoring and overclocking your hardware. And if you're interested in some tips when it comes to CPU, memory or GPU overclocking, definitely let me know in the comments below and I'll look into making a dedicated video for that in the future. And finally, never forget to disable mouse acceleration in the control panel. Simply navigate to the mouse tab and then to the pointer options and check if enhanced precision is off. And if you have a high refresh rate monitor, make sure that you're using all the hertz that you paid for by either going to Windows Advanced Display Options or to the Nvidia's display driver in the display tab and changing the refresh rate value to whatever highest value that you can get. Next, let's talk peripherals. And if you've watched the channel for a while, you know that I like myself some small lightweight wireless mice. But when it comes to any mouse whatsoever, it's very important to have some decent default options set up. For starters, you should always make sure that you have the highest polling rate option resolution dialed in, which usually is 1000 Hz, and normally the default value is somewhere around 250 to 500 with most mice. You can check that in Logitech's G-Hub software or in Razer Synapse or in any other manufacturer's software, and sometimes there's even a switch in the bottom of certain mice. Then let's talk about DPI, and here there aren't really any correct settings or any best settings, but there's definitely some rules you should probably know. For starters, just don't max out your value to whatever the max is, because you're just gonna get uncontrollably fast aim. Stick to values from around 400 to 3200, and keep in mind that your DPI is basically the resolution in which your mouse sensor tracks your movement. The higher the number, the faster the mouse will feel, but also the lower the input delay from when you move the mouse to when it actually moves on screen. There's this great video from Optimum Tech where he tested values from 100 all the way up to 3200 DPI, and there's a significant reduction in sensor delay until around 1600. And when it comes to sensitivity, you should always try to aim with your entire arm and not just have your mouse very fast and just aim with your wrist. That can be very hard to control. So my advice is to always aim for lower sensitivity, pun definitely intended, so that you aim with your entire arm and not with just your wrist. This will give you the most control and is a solid place to start, but keep in mind what I said about the DPI and the input delay. Let me give you my example. For years, my DPI was 400, my Windows sensitivity was 6 out of 11, and in-game in Apex Legends, for example, I have a 2.0 sensitivity. This was what I knew and what I thought was the best for me, but after I learned about the effects of DPI in the input delay, I raised my sensitivity to 800, my DPI value to 800. I lowered my in-game sensitivity from 2 to 1 because I doubled the DPI. I cut my in-game sensitivity in half, and to avoid having a very fast cursor on Windows, I lowered my Windows sensitivity from 6 out of 11 to 4 out of 11, and it's been mostly an improvement. Keep in mind that going under 6 out of 11 in the Windows sensitivity doesn't really have any negative impacts, but going over it definitely adds some acceleration, and you want to try to avoid that. But for most games that support raw mouse input, the Windows sensitivity is completely bypassed. Then if you have a wireless mouse, make sure you have the dongle as close to the mouse as possible, and if you have a wired mouse, particularly if your cable is very stiff and heavy, consider investing in a bungee and you can thank me later. Or you can just tape your mouse wire to the monitor's back and call that a poor man's bungee, but the bungee will just work better. And finally, let's talk in-game settings, and if you really want to get competitive, it's pretty clear option. Just lower most things and try to keep your native resolution. This usually results in the best visibility and the smoothest performance no matter what your hardware is, and if you're serious about your game, even if you have a beefy system like mine, I still play Apex in mostly all low settings and just rise up some that I know have zero impacts in the game performance. Also keep in mind that any changes that you make in the GeForce Experience overlay can have severe impacts in your gaming performance, so do as much as you can in the Nvidia driver and avoid using any overlaid filters on top of them. For example, adding some sharpness to Apex in the driver results in zero performance impact, while doing the same changes in the overlay results in 11% increase in GPU usage. And in my case, in this particular scene, I have the headroom so I don't lose FPS, but if I lower my GPU clocks to simulate a less powerful system, I go from 171 to 148 frames per second, which is quite substantial. And most people usually just want to add some sharpness and some digital vibrance, and those are very easy to change in the Nvidia control panel at no performance loss. Also in game, never forget to disable VSync and enabling Nvidia Reflex whenever possible to reduce your input delay. But even better than Reflex is to optimize your game settings so that you can get as many FPS as you want, and then add an FPS limiter with RTSS, that means Rivatuner Statistics Server. It's a sideloaded app that comes with MSI Afterburner, so that your frame times are as even as possible and you avoid every stuttering and maximize your overall in-game smoothness. And of course, these are just some of the many things that you can change in your setup in order to get it primed and ready for gaming, and hopefully some of these helped you out. And if you have any questions or certain things that just popped into your mind whilst I was explaining what I do every time, definitely leave a comment below. I'll be hanging out under there to help you out with anything that I can. but you're here, but it's absolutely nothing to do with gaming settings, anything of the sort. You're just here for some Feline action, and I will surely share it with you. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and you stick around, and yeah, bye!